Welcome back to our Bible studies around the table here on a Friday, and we've reached the point of Mark chapter 7 this week. We hope that you will join in with us, and we're going to read around as we usually do, looking through the verses as they come, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss it and see what we can see within the verses and discuss. So, Lydia's going to start off, Mark chapter 7 and verse 1.
Okay. Traditions and commandments. Now when the Pharisees gathered to him, with some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem, they saw that some of his disciples ate with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands properly, holding to the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other traditions that they observe, such as the washing of cups and pots and copper vessels and dining couches. And the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" And he said to them, "Well, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. You leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men.'"
And he said to them, "You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honour your father and your mother,' and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or his mother, 'Whatever you would have gained from me is Corban,' that is, given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down, and many such things you do." And he called the people to him again and said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him." And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable, and he said to them, "Then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart but his stomach, and is expelled? Thus he declared all foods clean."
And he said, "What comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." And from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an unclean spirit heard of him, and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syro-Phoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs."
And he said to her, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment. And they begged him to lay his hand on him. And taking him aside from the crowd privately, he put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be open." And his ears were opened, and his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And Jesus charged them to tell no one. But the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, "He has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak.
Okay, so we start off with the Pharisees, and I was trying to figure out where this was placed, but it doesn't say here, does it? Maybe say in the other Gospels.
Are they still in Nazareth? Are they still there? Like, you see we're in verse 53 to 4 in chapter 6, but the also says wherever he came in villages, cities or countryside. Yeah.
So I'm supposing that they'll be somewhere near the synagogue since the Pharisees are there, but maybe I'm completely wrong. They could be everywhere.
Like that everywhere, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also they don't necessarily need to be near the Pharisees, but the Pharisees come out of their way.
I think there's a delegation that's been made up already, hasn't it? I think that's one of the big things about this opening passage is that the Pharisees gathered to him with some of the scribes who'd come from Jerusalem. There was really a delegation to come and to find something that he was doing wrong. I think. Like it wasn't an accident that they were together. They were on their way to trip him up in some way.
Yeah.
And just happened to find the thing that they wanted there with the hand washing.
Yeah, so they did find something that was wrong, but it wasn't necessarily wrong in our rule book, but they had their own Mishnah, right?
Yeah, and not even in theirs really, because it's Exodus chapter 30. It talked about going in and the ceremonial cleaning of your hands, which. But they had taken that to the extreme, hadn't they? So
it's kind of a subject that's come up a lot in the last year, hasn't it? Remember sort of this time last year, anytime you came in with your shopping, everybody had to wash their hands and make sure that everything was cleansed. And of course we have the ritual when you come into church of putting on the sanitizer. That's not really what this is talking about though, is it?
No. Seemingly they would get an eggshell and a half of water and they would put on their fingers to their wrist and wash very, very thoroughly all the way down, and then put more water, and it was all important the ways it happened. It wasn't just like how we, even again like you say this year, we've been learning happy birthday as you wash your hands, make sure you get in amongst all the fingers. It was very ceremonial, wasn't it? And
so I think I'm right in saying they took the laws of the Old Testament and they made it like more specific in saying like, right, this is what extent this rule goes to, and a lot of the things that they did and said to do were good things, like we need to wash our hands because or else we might get diseases or else we'll spread germs, but they took it to such a high extent that it was like too far.
Yeah, the thing is here is that Mark makes sure to say that it was defiled, that is unwashed. He didn't say they had dirty hands. So this wasn't about hygiene at all. The disciples' hands could have been perfectly clean, but they hadn't washed them in the specific way the Pharisees wanted them washed.
And again, the Pharisees, originally their motives had been good. The desire was, okay, we really don't want to break God's law, so we'll make a guideline that's a way back here, and we'll say we'll not pass this mark, and then there's no danger of us going past God's command. So that was how it started, but then as we come on to see, their guideline became almost more important than God's command.
they had two kinds of laws. They had a written law and an oral law. And the oral law was what those things that you say that it was just in their minds and their tradition and their interpretation of the tradition. And Jesus didn't come to support the oral law, he came to support the written law, and he said that he would fulfill that, but he didn't fulfill the oral law,
Right.
which is what they were doing.
Yeah, and that's what you're saying, that they were honouring with their ideas of we'll do this, but their heart behind it was actually just almost like a checklist, almost like I'm so great, I've done so well in all these things.
A really strict Jew would have even washed between courses. So it wouldn't have just been like the ceremonial cleaning at the beginning of the meal, it would be all the way through, so it all became a bit silly, didn't it? And yet it started well, as often these things do,
Yeah. They had all sorts of traditions about washing cups and pitchers and bronze vessels and dining
You know,
couches,
couches, yeah.
just in case
I used to do it a
defilement
lot.
might cling to the couch and then
Mm.
defile them in the touching of it. Because we know that's kind of what the Bible does talk about, isn't it? In the Old Testament law, that when something is defiled, anything that touches it then becomes defiled itself or themselves.
I think this is where you see Mark, who Mark is writing to as well, because obviously, you know, Matthew's written to Jews, he would never have to explain this, but Mark takes the time
Yeah.
to just say, oh, this means this, and that's really helpful for us, because we would never
Yeah.
really know these sort of things if it wasn't included.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so Isaiah goes on to say, in vain do they worship me. So it's like they're being vain, they're being self-centered, but vain can also mean like meaningless. So all their efforts are just causing up to do nothing good, which is really sad.
Yeah.
I just find it so funny the way like Jesus just turns around and is like, well, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites? Ooh,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of Isaiah has prophesied about you very well,
Yeah.
in that he was writing to people who were hypocritical
Oh, okay.
in their religion, in their following the rituals of law, but not really worshipping with their hearts. And as Isaiah was writing to people then, so you, although being leaders of the religion, you have become just like them.
That makes sense, because I was sort of like, it doesn't really sound like a Jesus thing to say, well, the
Yeah.
whole like start with a well. I couldn't
Yeah.
really understand where that was coming from, but yeah, now.
It's really where legalism begins, isn't it? It's like you're saying you're teaching the doctrines that you have, but as the commandments of men. You're teaching the commandments of men as doctrines, and you're saying, you know, and that's exactly what happens, isn't it? Oh, you know, you can't do this on a Sunday, or you can't wear that. It actually then becomes a little bit like that's one of
And
our
we're supposed
thing.
to have convictions.
Absolutely.
We're supposed to read the Bible and interpret it the way that we feel
Yeah.
is right for us and
Yeah.
is right by God. But then that is our conviction, and we cannot put that on another person because they have their wisdom from God where they are at.
Yeah.
It's a fine line, obviously, because you know when God gives His commands, it's not that anybody can just interpret that however they like. But as you say, if God sheds light in different ways to different people, then we need to be careful, I suppose, in the way that we consider the behaviour of others.
There's a big thing as well, like where even for ourselves, like the people honour me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And that even as we evaluate and look at our own lives, like we might read the Bible, but our heart's far from Him. We might pray, but really our heart's far from Him. We might go to church, but our heart's far from Him. And so actually what He's saying here could really apply to us, because then in vain we're worshipping Him and we're only one step away from then breaking commandments.
Yeah.
And that's the next logical step actually, is to start then, you know, dishonouring God, and then we go down a very slippery slope.
It goes back to what Lisa was talking about on Sunday, doesn't it? That God looks at the heart of man. He's not looking for outward religious observance and obedience, unless that is coming from a heart that is full of devotion and wanting to obey and worship.
I love that he then goes on to give such a good example of them completely contradicting themselves, and like when he spells it out, it's like, how stupid are you? But you know, he doesn't just say this, you're teaching the doctrines of man and as you're teaching the commandments of man as doctrine. He says that and then gives an example.
Yeah.
He does. And I wonder though, do they listen? Exactly, it's a similar thing whenever you speak to someone who you deem to not have it right, you know, if a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness, and it's slightly askew, and maybe majorly askew, but they don't realise it, and you try to explain it to them, but they're not getting it. I wonder were these guys getting it, what Jesus was saying to them, but yeah. I don't really remember reading about Corban before.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is the only place that it's mentioned in the Bible.
That might be why.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's the only place in the Bible, but it's definitely the only, I think it is the only place in the Bible.
And it means like being given to God. Is that right? It's like entirely given to God. So it's like a name for that, a Corban. I thought it must be somebody or something, or it's almost like you're your tithes and offerings, your Corban.
Basically, if someone declared something Corban, it became sacred and nobody could touch it. Nobody could like demand to have it. You know, so if I said this is Corban, I basically can't use it because it is God's.
Okay.
And you can't say, hey, I need that because it is God's.
That's messy, isn't it? It can become quite messy. People want things from someone else, and then you can definitely see that could be overused and mistreated.
Yes, and that's sort of what's happening here because I didn't really understand where it's quite a complicated way that you put it as well, and I was like, it baffled my mind.
So basically, it's about, because I guess the commandments talk about, you know, as you're in our family, you must obey us just now. But then whenever you leave our home and go and live somewhere else, then you have to honour us rather than obey us. And this is what's happening here. And it's about, you know, honouring your parents and looking after them, especially in that culture.
Yeah.
And then them saying, well, we can't because our money or whatever is Corban. So therefore I don't have to. So almost like you're being so holy, and then in turn you're actually being so bad because you're not really doing what God has asked of you.
Yeah. I have down, you know, that physical need comes before holding a tradition for God. It always does. You see that so often. He's like, yeah, those traditions might even be good things. But if there is a physical need of somebody, he just goes...
Well, yeah, like you say, because Jesus, you know, it was always that thing, wasn't it? Oh, you're healing on the Sabbath. Well, yeah, of course I am, because, you know what, this person's in need.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I'm dealing with that lady. Well, you know, yeah, of course I am, because she's in need and she's ready to listen.
Yeah. It's so disrespectful to not do that, especially as that's even tradition. Like, your parents have given you your whole lifestyle and
Amen, Lydia.
helped you grow
Preach it,
up
sister.
and fed you and given you a house. If you don't pay them back, then you are basically not saying thank you. You're just walking out the door, almost ignoring your parents.
In that culture, especially, you know.
Yeah. Verse 13 is, you know, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you handed down.
Yeah.
It is just put there so black and white, isn't it? Like,
and many such things you do. It's not just that. It's like, there are many things that you do like this that actually make no sense. And
Making the word of God of no effect through your traditions. And we see it still today, don't we? You know, people who almost worship the church fathers or the great theologians of the past almost more than they worship Jesus. And they follow the teachings of a particular system of theology more than just following the clear, plain way that the Bible is written.
yeah, and that can even come down to, you know, like when you're unhappy with how your church works because you don't think that it should work that way. You know, down to, I don't know, like songs that they sing that, like Jesus is saying right now, you know, there's so much more important things than arguing over, you know, how many songs we sing or how we sing them or how we stand up to do certain things and sit down to do other things.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of man-made tradition in church, no matter where that is or how it's done. And you might say, well, let's get away from that and do something different, but then that becomes the tradition, whatever you change to do.
That's true.
Yeah. So then Jesus is talking to everybody. He uses this as a great teaching moment, and he's saying that he cares more about what comes out of your mouth than what goes in it.
Yes. Well, it's really, that's a good way of putting it, because actually, like, it kind of, you could get this a little bit misconstrued this little bit, couldn't you? Because like, there's nothing going inside the person that can defile him. But that's not true, is it? We know that people can watch things and do things that defile their minds. That's not what Jesus is talking about.
This is talking about food.
Food, exactly. Yeah, and he's saying that everything, and I love how he's talking about food here, and he's going to talk about people next. So I think he's saying, it's almost like he's giving a little snapshot. Look, I want you to understand this, because if you understand the food, then you understand why I'm heading next to the Gentiles. I'm going to turn inside on in the very next paragraph. And I want you to understand that if you can eat anything, then you can also love anyone.
Yeah.
I guess he's also linking back to the thought of washing their hands before they're eating. That wouldn't defile them.
Yeah. I really liked what someone said. they said if you eat something bad, if something goes into you that's bad, then it gets expelled, it gets distinguished, goodbye, it's gone. But if it goes out of your mouth, if you say something bad to someone, you can't get rid of that. It stays. It's permanent, and that's what defiles.
Yeah.
You know, so at this point the Jews are still under rules of what they can eat.
Yeah, kosher, is that
Yes,
kosher rules?
and when he says here, like, thus he declared all foods clean, Jesus didn't actually say that. That's
Yeah.
Mark saying
yeah.
that in light of the fact that he knows later on he's going
Yeah.
to say that.
In Acts chapter 10,
Mhm.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't that the bit, is that what you want to say?
I wasn't going to go to the scripture, so you go for it.
Okay, so this is obviously where Peter's sitting there, and then the sheep comes down, isn't it? And he
Yeah.
says, "Oh, I couldn't partake," and then
Yeah.
he says that all things are don't call anything unclean. So so Jesus, I think at this point is thinking, this is down the road, this is coming to you
Yeah.
guys, so you might as well start to get used to it now.
Yeah, because he's come to say, you know, your traditions don't mean anything compared to like the love I have for you and the relationship I want with you. And obviously the traditions, like the written law is so important at the moment for them. But he's kind of alluding to the fact that he's like, I'm going to wipe that out.
Yeah.
You're not going to have it anymore. And this is sort of him hinting it. And I love
Yeah.
that Mark has noticed that and gone in the brackets, this is coming. He didn't actually say it at this point. But
Somebody has said that this is probably the most revolutionary passage that Jesus actually spoke in his time on earth, because for them, because they were like, what? Say what? No, that's not gonna ever happen. Do you know what I mean? And that he basically, and I love also that he comes in verse 21 and starts off with, it's like lists 13 different things that that happen out of the heart of a man. And so he gives them basically, this is who you are. So you think eating kosher foods make you good, actually this is who you are. So kosher food's not doing you any good, really. It's not helping you, because that's what defiles you.
yeah. I heard this really good illustration for it says in verse 21, from within, out of the heart of man comes all of these things. And it talked about, there was a tree and there was a huge storm, and in the storm the tree blew over and was knocked to the ground, and you expect it to be the storm. But when you look at the tree stump after the storm, you realise there's a lot of rot in the middle of it. And so while the elements helped, it was really the rot that made it
That's so true.
come over, because none of the other trees knocked over. All the other trees were still standing, even though they were faced with a storm.
Yeah. Spurgeon had something similar to say of like sin, because he talked about like sometimes think sin as a mud splash. Do you know what I mean? Someone has passed you by, but actually what sin is like an internal mud splash all the way through your own heart. And actually when you cut someone open, that's what's in there.
Yeah.
And yeah.
It's interesting you say there's 13 different things.
Is that right?
It's,
I didn't count
I
it.
don't know, but I mean 13 generally in scripture is a number associated with evil. We have the superstitious belief in our own days, but
Yeah.
the Bible was there way ahead of it. And so often where the 13 number is mentioned.
I didn't, I kind of put that out there because I'd read it somewhere where being 13, and I thought, that's really cool that you picked that up, because I was kind of going, it doesn't really mean anything to me, but 13.
That's cool.
That is
Yeah, so the Pharisees were just really proud, weren't they? And they were thinking, oh, we'll catch this guy out and we'll be so holy, but actually they made themselves foolish.
It
and
all
that's
turned
one of
around.
the things that's listed there. So, they go to Tyre and Sidon.
I love Mark's account. Like we've said before, he just speeds through things. But he's like, Mark's writing about, and then Jesus said this, and he did that, and he said next.
Yeah. It's about 50 miles away
Right.
from wherever they were. So that's not just a day's journey, is it? That's a few days it took him to get there. I love that. I love it says, yet he could not be hidden. And I think that's the thing, because Jesus is truly in your life, he can't be hidden.
Yeah.
And I think that he never should be, you should never try to, but if he's truly yours, then that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So this woman falls at his feet.
Yeah.
What's amazing about that?
Her faith already, isn't it? That she believes that he is going to do something. And
Yeah.
He was a Greek or a Gentile, really, I suppose.
Yeah.
I think of it.
Yeah, she was an idol worshipper from a place that worshipped idols.
Yeah.
So everything
Yeah.
around her basically denied
Yeah.
Jesus and
Yeah.
his authority and everything. So she was completely going against her entire culture.
That's right. And Jesus, like, even that whole thing of wanting to be hidden, it was probably not because like he wanted to keep his anonymity and be like, oh, I don't want to see anybody. It was more because he didn't want to needlessly offend, because
Yeah.
that was a group of people who were so different to him and his Jewish roots that he was he didn't want to be, out there. And actually, he knew that it would bubble over.
Yeah.
And this
I had
lady
heard-
is here. Sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'd heard that we're not really given a reason, and that's actually a really cool reason that he didn't want to be. He wanted to be hidden, but he was with the Gentiles, and it was probably that he was wanting some time away, some time to rest, some time to pray and things. And you kind of seen before, he can struggle to find that, especially with the people that hear so much about him, like the Jews. So he possibly went to the Gentiles to try and get a bit of peace.
Yeah.
And then one of them finds him anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find it very interesting, the contrast between the Jews and this woman. I think there's
Yeah.
always this thing where the Pharisees are so proud, but the Gentiles are always so humble, that come to Jesus, and it's just so opposite.
Yeah. And those two things, like faith and humility coupled together, like Jesus adores that, I think.
Yeah.
Particularly, like, he sees this woman and that's what it is. Like, she's got faith, but she's also humble. And it's almost like he can't say no to that. Particularly, it's so endearing to him, and he just loves on her and decides to help her.
Well, the way that Mark describes this woman is he gives that he gives her gender, her ethnicity, and her origin, and all three of those things would have been strikes against her to Jesus. To a Jew, they wouldn't have had time for a woman. They wouldn't have had time for her as a Gentile or a Syrophoenician. So it just is Mark showing you that she wasn't just a Gentile, she was all of these things. So Jesus should have just been like, I don't have time for you.
So true.
Yeah. It's not even like you're lower than me, it's like you are unclean and nasty. You worship a false god, or more than one maybe.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to see in a minute, because it's a sort of difficult passage, isn't it, that we've all kind of had to get our heads around, because it feels like it's derogatory, what Jesus says to her. But that isn't derogatory by comparison to what the Jews would say to her, which would be derogatory. So that basically they call her what we wouldn't want to call anyone in our society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that as you were saying, that they were coming to get rest and refreshed and perhaps fed, that maybe puts into context a little bit where Jesus said, let the children first be filled, let the disciples have their rest time, let them have a decent meal, and then we can come and deal with you and speak with you.
Matthew calls her a Canaanite, which I think is really interesting. Again, you're seeing what the different Gospels are for, because this one, explains, why she wouldn't have been accepted by Jesus. But Matthew, as written to Jews, shows the biblical train of thought, because Canaan was it Noah's grandson, so Ham's son, and Ham, not a good fella, then his whole family sort of went off on this really bad way, and then has produced her.
And the Canaanites were all supposed to be driven out of the land, or killed, I suppose, when the children of Israel entered, but there were areas that they didn't
Deal with.
overcome. So,
it's always those things again where you see that when things have been dealt with way back, how they can rear the ugly heads again. I think that's always a good thing that God points out to us, that actually deal with your problems, get them sorted out, because actually if you don't, they could rear their ugly heads again in a different way, in a different time, and bring a lot of things down. But anyway, she comes and that's not the case just now.
Yeah, so she's coming begging that her daughter is clean from this demon by Jesus, and he rebukes her, or he says this sentence, let the children be fed first. So that's referencing the Jews, as Dad mentioned already. So yeah, this is a really sticky
Tricky one.
verse.
Right, Jonathan, over to you.
Yeah, well, we were listening to a recording of someone speaking on this, I suppose brought out the meaning of the word dogs, whereas in our culture it is absolutely derogatory, especially to call a woman. But the word translated dogs here, apparently it's not really the derogatory term that we use, but it was more like speaking of the little chihuahua in the handbag sort of picture, the picture of the little the cherished pet.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I had written this down because I really liked the way it was worded. But you know, the Jews would have called the Gentiles filthy dogs. They would have called them dogs. And it's reckoned at this point Jesus probably would have been speaking Greek, because Greek was the language of the day, and she obviously wasn't a Jew, so she wouldn't have known his native language. And the Greek word for like the bad kind of dogs is, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's like kuon or something like that. Whereas Jesus uses the word kunarian, which means little dog.
So he's actually upgrading them.
Yeah.
Where it seems like he's really harsh here.
Yeah. So yeah, he is saying, like, they're saying you're a dog, and he's saying you can be my little pet that can come and take.
He was actually showing that she had a place in his house.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And that she would be fed. She just had to wait her turn a little bit.
Yeah.
And then
Jesus made no bones about the fact that he had come first and foremost to the house of Israel, the Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he likes what she says. doesn't he?
Yeah, I always got really confused by that. Like, why did he come to the Jews first? But he always makes very clear that he is going to the Gentiles. You know, he never says, I didn't come for the Gentiles. He just said, I came first for the Jews. And then I read something that said, you know, this order, it wasn't favoritism. It was a method of reaching the large number through a smaller number. So, you know, like, the normal thought process would be go to the Jews because they already follow him, tell them about this step, and then tell them, right, go tell the Gentiles. And that would make it so much easier, because you know Jesus obviously could have, but he was one guy, and so he thought, I'll go and tell this group and send them out.
Yeah, and she acknowledges Jesus, and she said, yes, Lord.
She doesn't dispute him at all. She's just like, yep.
She knows exactly who he is, doesn't she?
But she still believes that he will have mercy. Which is
such
so
faith,
brilliant.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly. And a little quip as well, isn't she? She's cool, like, exactly. Like if I'd be a bit like, oh no, to that degree, like, you're right, sorry, I shouldn't be here. I feel like I might be, but she's just like, no, you're a compassionate person. I can see this. You've mercy. You've done great things. I need this miracle. I guess when you're desperate too.
Yeah. That's actually something that I really love about this, is that she didn't go, oh, but it's really desperate situation. Oh, but this girl really needs you. Oh, but I've come all this way. She didn't rationalize her situation at all. She just played with the fact that she knew he was merciful, and she knew that he had a good heart. And I think that is often
and
the
persevered,
wrong way that we go about things. It says that she kept asking. This one says she begged, but another version says, and so she kept asking because she knew he could do it, not because she felt that she was entitled to it.
Exactly. Yeah. So good.
Yeah. And then he says the amazing statement, the demon has left your daughter. It's not even that he goes to the house, it's not even that he prays, it's not even that he rests a hand on anyone. It's already done because of your faith.
Yeah. So good.
Yep. So now we're on to the deaf man.
I was going to say sorry, but a silly joke.
So we're in Decapolis, and they're
the region of
bringing in the deaf man to Jesus.
And he's got a speech impediment. This poor guy.
Yeah.
He's not got it easy in that time.
That kind of stands to reason if he can't hear, he wouldn't be able to form his words
Yeah.
well because he doesn't know how they're meant to sound.
It doesn't say from when he couldn't speak from
Mhm.
here, but maybe that's not important.
I love that Jesus like he uses such a different way to communicate with this man than he's ever done before. So like before he's used words, before he's used other people's words, before he's done lots of different things, but with this guy he can't hear him and he can't speak to him. And neither can he he can't speak to him. So he uses like a touch and he uses his own spittle
Yeah.
to actually make him feel him.
Yeah.
And that's nice,
I
isn't
think
it?
that's also back to, last week we were talking about that it doesn't give us the exact way that some miracles happen because we just need to depend on him. So he's changing this every time because he's like, it's not this thing that's making it happen, it's not these magic words.
Yeah.
I can change it and it still happens because it's God.
That's so true.
He touches the bits that need to be healed,
Mm.
and then they're healed.
It's in a rational way though, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
health and hygiene gone
Yeah.
completely aside.
Well, yeah, I don't think you should do this in church this Sunday,
No,
Jonathan.
no.
Yeah. I like he sighs, it says that look up to heaven, he sighed.
Yeah.
And it's like an inward groan, just like oh God, do something amazing here. And, like that, when that feeling comes on you, you're just like, you're, please God, do something here.
And he doesn't need a speech therapist. He knows how to
Yeah,
do it instantly.
It's the same word in Isaiah 35, the Greek word. Mark uses in this one the same word as, let me read this to you. Isaiah 35 verses 5 and 6, it say, "Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer and the tongue of the mute sing for joy." So it's mute, the same word as that. And it's like, almost he's saying, so the Greek word seemingly is mogalalon. The Greek is bellissimo. Anywho, so it's like Mark is saying that same Redeemer is here now, and it's the only place that Greek word is used, and it's a really unusual word for it. But the dumb will sing, like that's what he's saying basically. And this is who it is that does it, yeah.
Yeah. And so then they do exactly the opposite of what Jesus says to do, which is so often in the Bible and so often in our lives too. But yeah, it's just how can you not shout about what Jesus has
I
done?
love the word zealously.
Yeah.
That's just a good word,
Yeah.
isn't it? We don't use that word enough.
Yeah.
He's zealous.
Yeah,
Make
it's
it
so
clear.
nice what they say here. He has done all
Oh.
things well.
Don't you want like a plaque of
Yeah.
that on your
Yeah.
house? Like that is, Bethany, get onto that for me.
Yeah.
That is, he has done all things well. Because that's the thing, he does, we look at creation and in these good days, he's done all things well, but you look at redemption and he's done all things well. Like there's nothing from there to there or in between that he hasn't done well. And he continues to do that.
I think miracles are one of the most amazing things
Mm.
because we can go about our lives and say how great Jesus is, but whenever a miracle happens, whenever someone is raised from the dead, whenever someone is healed, we are just overcome with his greatness. It is like it comes back to life, our joy and our salvation. It's just so exciting.
And it's about seeing those things happen, isn't it? And not always like, sometimes we're looking for the big mad fat things, we're like, whoa, but actually those little miracles every day, like all the things that God does and moves and works, and you're just like, I can't believe that this is how these things work out. Do you know what I mean? And I think when you start seeing those little things again, you then realise that there are bigger things that he's doing.
With your reference back to Isaiah, the people here are basically saying this man is fulfilling the prophecies about the Messiah.
Yeah.
They're doing just what was prophesied the Messiah would do.
Yeah. This is him. This is him who does this. So Mark's saying that, and they're saying, he's doing what this guy is supposed to come and do.
Yeah.
So good.
And this man, he had lived with this probably for a long time, and he was probably wondering, why have I been given this by God or whoever he thought he had given it to him. And then you just see that it results in such a great good. You know, it's been such a terrible bad, but it's such a better, amazing miracle that's happened. And that's, I think, what we see whenever something bad happens to someone, something good happens afterwards.
You would never known the joy of hearing and speaking
Yeah.
if those things hadn't been withheld for that time.
His whole life must have changed just completely though. Like Jack he probably wouldn't be able to hold down a job or, you know, well, I don't know, maybe he could be a tradesman, I suppose, of some description, but you just think all the things that you couldn't do and then suddenly could do. It's kind of amazing, isn't it?
And it always points back to the glory of God. Whether these people acknowledge it or not, this man did, but sometimes they don't, like Barabbas. It always points back to a glory that God will show.
Yes, yeah. And that's what you want, don't you? When the squeeze is on, you want it to be the God that comes out of you rather than, you know, angst or guilt or fear or, you know what I mean? I think we're all human and those things do happen, but I think that you want to look and say, do you know what? He has done all things well.
Yeah.
And he's doing all things well and he will do something well. Do you know what I mean? Even whenever it doesn't feel like you're in any way able to take the next step, he'll help you.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us again tonight or this morning whenever you're watching this. It was a great chapter. If you have anything to add, that would be amazing. We would love to read it and hear it. And then we'll see you next week on Mark chapter 8.
Bye.
Bye.